Upon encountering the USS Dauntless in the Delta Quadrant, the crew of the USS Voyager thought they'd found the answer to their prayers in the form of a fast way home, but of course it turned out to be a trap set by the lone survivor of a race assimilated by the Borg. Arturis, the owner of the vessel, belonged to species 116, and his people exhibited some interesting technology in the form of Quantum Slipstream Drive and ship-wide particle synthesis. The latter of these two allowed for the molecular reconstruction of the interior and exterior of a ship to a limited extent. It was the Slipstream Drive, however, that was the true treasure. Despite losing the Dauntless and the final survivor of species 116 to the Borg, the crew of the USS Voyager had had many opportunities to perform detailed scans of the vessel and tinker with its workings. Upon returning to their own vessel, they set about on a project to recreate the drive, and they were successful to an extent. The Federation has always been seeking faster and faster methods of interstellar travel, but Slipstream Drive seems the most promising by far, and many books and such mark it as the new step in Starfleet propulsion. Most of this information comes from Star Trek Online and the post-Dominion stories centred around the USS Aventine, but Starfleet, alongside managing development and improvements of conventional warp, began serious developments of the Quantum Slipstream Drive on Voyager's return. But what makes this technology stand out over other failed experiments such as the USS Excelsior's transwarp drive or transwarp coils stolen from the Borg? Well, it seems that Borg transwarp is yet to be replicated by Starfleet in full, though it can be incorporated with Federation tech to create short bursts of transwarp before it burns out, as seen in Voyager. But it should also be noted that the USS Voyager had undergone extensive modification prior to this already. So the integration and acquisition of Borg technology is generally a risk best avoided except in remarkable circumstances. And as for earlier transwarp, well, apparently they just never found those bolts Scotty took out from the Excelsior. I'm joking, but that form of transwarp requires its own video as there are plenty of theories around it. But for a start, let's look how relatively easily it was to create a slipstream drive. The crew of the USS Voyager, the only Federation ship in the Delta Quadrant with no starbase nor port to dock at, managed to overhaul their warp core to accept the modifications required for a fully functional slipstream drive. This already suggests that the drive only required an adaptation of existing technology, in part, and that it was not too far from compatible with Federation standards, though it did require the use of Benamite crystals, short-lived lattices that provided the short-term access to the quantum slipstream. So there are limiting factors, but there are too many similarities. For example, it was all still powered by the matter-antimatter reactions of a Federation vessel, and didn't need the support of a network of gates like Borg or Vardois corridors. Warp speed has a limit that has been vexing Federation engineers for generations, except on Paris apparently, but that's a whole different headache. In the 24th century, Warp 10 is infinite velocity, but they have never been able to achieve this speed. Again, shut up. No matter how many 9s they add to the end of Warp 9. So clearly, the answer to higher speeds lies outside of Warp Drive. The Quantum Slipstream Drive itself is described as something that you can enter into and be carried by. The nature of a ship's drive, in this case, is to maintain a field that lets the ship ride the slipstream like a glider in air currents rather than a plane, or so it seems. While Voyager's drive was deemed too unsafe and eventually dismantled, the problems were navigational and computational, not the hardware itself. This problem was compensated for in the original Voyager test flights by having a smaller vessel flying in front of the ship and calculating the phase variances to beam back to the mother ship, but the risk of error increased with the duration of the flight. In the USS Aventine, this same workaround was applied with the use of a chronoton integrator, which actually took readings from a few seconds into the future to provide enough time for the calculations to be applied shipside. Another issue is that microfractures in the Benamite can occur that begin to destabilise the slipstream. For this reason, slipstream for the foreseeable future is likely to be limited to short bursts of speed to supplement warp drive, not replace it entirely, which is the conclusion reached in 2380s and still the case in 2409. Although by this time the drive is out of the experimental stages and a common integration of ships' systems. But even with these faults, slipstream seems to be the most promising development in recent Trek history and a true contender for the advancement of interstellar exploration. What do you think of the Quantum Slipstream Drive? Do you think its incorporation into starships should be canonically continued, or do you think it lessens the vastness of space? I think that it's about time the Federation developed some new faster-than-warp drive to allow for further exploration. After all, if not slipstream, then it would be a plot point like a wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant or an Iconian gateway. Or something. Slipstream, if working, allows for a continuation of the exploration into the unknown, even if it does risk some new plot juggling. Until the next vid, however, thanks for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.